Welcome to another exciting episode. We often meet with and support leaders and organizations who are on the forefront of innovation and product development. When we talk about bringing on experts, bringing on voices that know the industry, that understand what happens on the back end of organizations, you're going to enjoy this conversation we're about to have. Our guest has a depth of experience in this arena. As a matter of fact, you're going to see from our conversation that he understands truly what goes on when it comes to manufacturing and bringing out the very best for your company. Joining us today is David Fradin. He's the president of S.P.I.C.E Catalyst. What an interesting name. He is a product management expert with an incredible journey that spans across industry giants like HP and Apple. He's also the author of several insightful books, including Building Insanely Great Products and Successful Product Design and Management. Through his work, he's trained teams from all around the world, global leaders, including Cisco. He's going to share his experience of what it takes to create, manage world-class products. We're going to also dive into his special S.P.I.C.E framework, a proven approach to achieving product success. And we're going to explore his leadership journey a little bit, his passion for training, keys to innovation, and a rapidly evolving technological landscape. David, welcome to the program. How are you, sir?
Doing great. Glad to be with you.
Well, we're glad to have you on. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today. I know our listening audience is going to get a kick out of it, not because they perhaps have been in your world, but a lot of them work for organizations. They work for companies that have that understanding that they've got to be able to develop the right products. They've got to be able to release the right products in the right way in order to drive success. But let's start with your career a little bit. Talk about what it means to go from being classically trained as a product manager with companies like HP, working with Apple. Talk about that part of your journey and what that's done to allow you to have the framework that you have now, or at least the platform you have now to do what you're doing.
Well, back in 1932, a brand manager at Procter & Gamble wrote a job description for what a brand manager should be able to do. And he influenced Dave Packard and the other founders of Hewlett-Packard, and they changed the name from brand manager to product manager and made a few changes in the job description. So product management started at Hewlett-Packard in 1938. And that was the person that was supposed to be as close to the customer as possible and understand what it is that the customer wants to do so that their products and services would satisfy those needs of what the customer wants to do. So I joined the corporate PR department at HP in 1980 because of my background as an environmental mediator and helping site new facilities to help HP site new facilities around the country and handle the community relations. And I noticed when I got there that even though I had word processing back when I started my nationwide student organization in support of science and technology at the University of Michigan, and had chapters throughout the country. And I noticed that I had word processing for that nonprofit. And then later when I went to the Environmental Balance Association, I had word processing. And later when I ran John Conley's presidential campaign, I had word processing. So I got to the corporate PR department and everybody in the department knew how to type, but there was no word processing. We were doing everything on mechanical typewriters or IBM Selectric typewriters. So I introduced them to an internal word processing program that ran on the HP's mini computer, the HP 3000. And it turned out that that role of rolling out and implementing word processing in corporate PR is similar to a product manager's job. It's an internal product manager's job. So I was able to transfer laterally, which is one of the nice things about HP. They let you move around into a product management job in the information networks division. And I was responsible for a unified user interface. So if someone like at Ford, who was one of our major customers, was working on a mini computer and then moved over to the HP's personal computer, the user interface would be similar. And then the second product I had, which I was bringing to market, was HP Inform, which was an executive report writer, where an executive could say, okay, I want this data element, this data element, this data element, and produce a tabular report for me call, and that's set on top of a database, a relational database, which existed before Oracle had been formed. So I was trained there as a classical product manager. And as a result of that, Apple recruited me to bring the first hard disk drive to market, which was a huge hard disk drive, 5 megabytes of space, which I think I just filled up in the last sentence. And then it was really cheap. It was only $3,500. And nobody could understand why they would ever need that much computer memory space.
Yeah, at that time, why do you need so much? Now it's like, where is the memory space? But you know what's fascinating, David, and I'm so glad you shared all that, and thank you for giving us some insight to your leadership background and journey, and the fact that you were able to work on a campaign, presidential campaign for the former U.S. Secretary of Treasury and also former governor of the state of Texas, which is where I am, and so that's fascinating that you did that. And I don't want to go too much into the place you went to university there, but we may circle back to that because of my background as a big Ohio State fan. But I want to say this, it's fascinating to be able to see your work at HP, you work at Apple, and you said bringing the first hard disk drive on PC. That's awesome. I'm intrigued to ask you, what did these environments, I mean, they're very innovative in terms of the work that you guys were doing. What did it teach you? And then how do you as a leader, this is a question I ask sometimes to some of our guests, is how would you define success as a leader? And then how would you define success in terms of product management? Maybe we'll come back to the product management side later, but how would you define success as a leader?
Well, I think the key in both of those organizations, HP and Apple, is they each had a set of values. The HP's values is called the HP Way. And in 1996, Dave Packard published a book called The HP Way, which I highly recommend people to read. And coincidentally enough, Dave Kirby, that hired me into HP, was the editor of Packard's book.
Yeah.
And then at Apple, we had Apple Values, which was adopted from Intel Values, which was adopted from the HP Way. So I think the most important thing for a successful organization, and hence leadership that builds on that, is to have a set of values such that when everybody comes into a meeting to make a decision, they're all playing from the same playbook. They're all following the same values. We all understand everyone's coming from the same place. And some of the values at Apple was empathy for the customer, achievement, aggressiveness, make a positive social contribution, individual performance, a team spirit, innovation and vision. Vision is where some of the leadership comes from, individual growth and reward. And I always told people that worked for me that try to do the best job that you can. It's okay if you make a mistake, because as a flight instructor, the best way my students learned how to fly was to allow them to make a mistake, except within 100 feet of the ground. And that way they could learn, do the best job that they can, and be loyal to me. Don't cut me down behind my back, because time comes to get you a raise. If you've hurt my credibility, I may not be able to get you that raise. And lastly, in terms of reward, I tell them, tell me where you want to go with your life. What do you want to do when you grow up? So if I can help you do that, you'll be happier and do a better job, even though that may or may not mean that that employee will stick with me over a longer term. And then quality and excellence. So leadership has to emphasize that. And good management, which is key to any organization. And a manager has to inspire trust in them by trusting his people, so that if they say charge, everyone will charge and off into the same direction.
You know, I love this, David. If you don't mind me interjecting here, the fact that you could be able to, even though it's been some time since you've been with both organizations, that you can state clearly the values of those organizations speaks volumes. And some of the training that I do when I go into some of these smaller businesses is to ask them, what are your values? What does every employee know is central to the success of our organization? And if they don't know it, you don't know it. And you've got to be able to have that alignment. But the thing that blows me away is you ask the question, where do you want to go? Because when you can invest in the growth journey of the people that are under your leadership, it actually supports your leadership. And then they become more productive. They become more invested into the company, more invested into your growth as well. that's what I think a lot of leaders get confused with today is like, it's all about me. They'll figure it out, or they got HR to help them, or they've got the academy or learning platform to help them. No, you are there to serve as that mentor guide. And then to be able to say, I was a flight instructor too. Like, Dave, what haven't you done? That's fascinating. I love that. Let me ask this as keeping that same spirit of mind with values, success, and really why you're brought in as a consultant is to help with this area because I believe that a lot of product success for organizations they can fail because they can't keep up with the rapid growth of innovation and technology. So let's talk about what you've done and why you developed this framework that has become a cornerstone for a lot of the work that you do in this field. You've got this SPICE framework, and to me, I want to ask: is it as simple as just the acronym, strategy, process, information, customer, and employees? Or was there something else to this SPICE framework that led you to say, I want to put this together for the companies I'm consulting?
Well, you have to delve into each of those things, the product market strategy, the process, repeatable processes, having information necessary to make the decision, understanding your customer, what they want to do, when they want to do it, how they want to do it, where they want to do it, why they want to do it, how important is it to get done, and how satisfied are they with the current solution. And the E then in the SPICE mnemonic, and hence the name of my company, SPICE Catalyst, is give the skill sets and competencies through training to the across the 130 competencies that I've identified, which I describe in my books. So
That's fantastic.
that's the key.
You know what I think, Dave, which is awesome, and I appreciate you sharing that. You said, look, in my work, in my research, I've identified these core competencies that are going to help any organization, any leader to be able to position themselves for this successful launch or product release. So, what I've seen in terms of hearing what you shared, going and do some research on your company, your organization, is that each of the elements builds on each other. And that's where you get that sense of we can now lay out a path that's going to be consistent, a path that will enhance the ability to grab success. But I've got to ask, with the rapid rise of generative AI, this technology is going crazy. We're not just talking about the original disk, right? We're talking about these different growth of elements of technology. Talk about how your SPICE framework is helping organizations to understand how to put that together without, let's say, overlooking or dropping components of this.
Well, it goes back to understanding the customer. And I think an example of that is Henry Ford allegedly went out on the streets of Dearborn, not far from where I grew up in Detroit, and he asked people if they'd like to have a car. And people said had no idea what a car is. So they
Yeah.
said, "Oh." And he asked them, "Well, what do you want?" They said, "I'd like to have a faster horse." And perhaps that's part of the reason why he named the first car a horseless carriage. And so I advocate what companies should do in terms of trying to figure out what products or services to develop is first go out and observe what people do, then interview them, then do surveys across a representative sample of the personas that you're going to pursue with your product. And then if you have big data available, you can access that. And it's in the big data area where you could bring to bear artificial intelligence to understand what it is that you want your customer to do. But you got to be very careful. If the AI has been fed by garbage, the things it tells you back will be garbage.
Yeah.
And I think one of the scariest things in the world is Meta has announced that they're going to take our posts on Facebook, Instagram, and I think even on WhatsApp, and they're going to use that to train their AI engine. And that generative AI engine they're going to give away for free. So now, for example, in India a couple of years ago, because some Indian sects feel that or know that cows are sacred, someone on WhatsApp announced that this other group killed a cow and there was tremendous violence. I think this was in northern India, and over 100 people were killed based upon that false information.
Right.
So that's one of the dangers of AI is that you got to know and understand what information was used to train the AI before you trust the results that it gives you.
Yes, I'm so glad you said that, and what a tragedy. But it goes into me thinking about this aspect of output is only going to be as good as your input. And companies can become so enamored with technology that they can lose sight of the end user experience. They can lose sight of the ability to leverage AI in the way that it's going to best benefit them. And when you hear people say, "Well, I could just go to one of these AI tools like ChatGPT," but if you don't understand how to use prompts, if you don't understand how to feed it and help it to learn, you're actually not going to get the most out of it. And so this could complicate the customer experience. This can complicate your product release and helping to make that connection because it's really all about the connection. So, with that in mind, David, are there any other common challenges that you've seen in organizations when they're looking at product development, when looking at product release that your SPI framework actually addresses and helps them to overcome that?
Yeah, usually, by the way, about 35% of all new products, representing a waste of about $1 trillion a year worldwide,
Oh my goodness.
fail in the marketplace. And a big part of that is companies fail to provide the training necessary
Mm.
to learn those 130 competencies, which I describe in my widely published textbook called The Successful Product Design and Management Toolkit. And it's available on Amazon, also worldwide, along with my other books. So, as a result of failing to provide those competencies within the organization, the tendency for having product failure and waste goes way, way up.
This is something that really got me thinking here, David, because one of the things that you love doing, and this is clear throughout your history as a leader, is you love training, you love coaching. And part of the thing that you said here earlier is that your book addresses these 130 competencies that you've identified. What is it about training that you love? What is it that you enjoy most than more than just saying here's a book or go watch this or go read this or bring me in for a workshop for example? What is it you enjoy about training and why is that something that can still be overlooked by organizations who are literally trying to go down this path and not become a company that wastes money, wastes opportunities and time?
It's when the students bring me a six-pack of beer.
I've never tried that. I've never tried that. That's
Well,
interesting.
I'm too old for an apple. But actually, training your people is one of the most important things that you can do. A lot of companies that have had long-term success, like HP, incentivize their employees to get more and more training. Even Starbucks, if you're working there, and Amazon encourage training. And I think Starbucks pays for your college degree, or maybe it's Amazon. So that's critical. That's important. Unfortunately, ever since the Great Recession, companies have been cutting back on their training, feeling that it's an expense area rather than an investment area. And I could just think when the U.S. Military went into Desert Storm in the early 2000s, they, back in the 1990s, the first thing they did is take all the troops to Kuwait and train for 6 months before they attacked. The military believes very strongly, and you have to constantly train, 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 train. Yet corporations don't believe, for the most part, in the training or in the urgency of getting the training done. And I usually don't get a call to offer my courses across the keys to product success and or consulting until after a company has had two, three, four, five massive failures. Maybe senior people have gotten fired. The board has stepped in and say, "Hey, look, we don't have the competencies in order to have successful products and services."
You know what's interesting, David? I'm so glad you brought that up. And as a trainer myself, I focus mostly on soft skills. I've never received an apple, and I'll tell you, I taught at universities as well, and I've not received a six pack. So I must not be laying out my value prop good enough here. But the truth that you mentioned earlier is that organizations are failing to understand that this is an investment. And I'll tell you what's hard about this is that we tend to work on like a quarterly mindset. And because we're training this organization or we're training this division, we're training these employees, and I'm not seeing it right away. So therefore, it must not be worth it. No, it takes time. It takes time to measure these things correctly. So, how do you get them to slow down? Whoa, pull back on the reins here and understand the value of training these employees? Because what I've seen in terms of my work with organizations is that when employees feel invested in this sense, even if they don't have it in-house internally and they say, hey, go get it elsewhere, we'll give you a budget for it, then they actually become more efficient at work. They become more engaged at work. They become more excited about what they do. But how do you help them to say, hey, push pause, you're going to get the metrics you want, but it may not happen the next quarter? How do you get them to see the long game versus the short game, even though we're in this rapidly evolving world?
I can answer that with one word: Apple. Apple has a long view of the long term. They're not preoccupied in any way, shape, or form in quarterly profits. And back around 1980 or so, Wall Street shifted from annual results to quarterly results. And that caused, for example, I was at HP at the time. Used to put together our budget in the fall, and I think we were on a fiscal year, so we'd have budgets approved by November or December. When we went to quarterly incentives, frequently we put together our budget in December and wouldn't get it approved until May or June of the year that you're in, which caused all kinds of long range planning to go right out the door. And the company took a hit for that. And then Dave Packard came back after being deputy defense secretary, and he got the company to get back on looking at the long term. And that's what Apple does. They don't look at their profits. They look at the long-term customer satisfaction, knowing full well that the profits will take care of themselves. Unfortunately, most companies, at least that I know of in the United States and probably the world, are following more the Ayn Rand model of Atlas Shrugged, where profits is all that's important at the expense of society, and we're seeing
Yeah.
it played out in society today.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And to me, it's very challenging when you're trying to get people to understand that you got to think ahead. You got to be future thinking. And some of the clients that we work with in terms of our podcast sponsorships, they've been talking about the challenge to think 2, 3 years ahead. And when you're the CEO and you're driving this vision, you can't get caught up with everything that's going on today. You're thinking about what needs to be developed for tomorrow, what needs to be developed in your leaders in order to sustain the framework and the vision you're trying to put together. I think that's fascinating because it's so hard when you're thinking short term, but it's all about that sense of profit greed. It's a sense of get it now. We may not be relevant tomorrow, but if you believe in what you're doing, if you believe in the value you're bringing to your clients, you have to think the long game because ideally you want them to stay with you. You want them to become your evangelists, your apologists for why you need to be the companies that they work with and continue to trust in what you're designing, trust in what you're building. And that's why, in some ways, people have become loyal to Apple. Didn't matter how much it costs. We trust the design. We trust the quality of the work. We trust in what they're developing. Now, there might be some complaints. Why do I need to get a new charger every year? Even though the charger is like $20 compared to a $1,200 phone. But there's a sense of I trust in what they're doing because they've consistently shown that they're in it for the long haul, not for the short term. I want to talk a little bit about your book, Dave, and obviously you talked about the building insanely great products. And if you get a chance today and you're listening to our program and you love the content, you love the guests, and you appreciate the value that they bring to the work that you want to do as a leader, make sure you subscribe. You're downloading these programs. But I want to direct you, if you're listening today, go pick up a book. This is something you want to add to your shelf, not just to your library for looks, but to a growth strategy for you. His book is entitled Building Insanely Great Products. You get on Amazon, on the cover, you're going to see two bicycles, one with square wheels that get you nowhere, but the idea is great. The idea is awesome. Then you have a bicycle that makes sense. It's got wheels that's going to get you going. So, David, tell us a little bit about what people can expect from the book outside of the core competencies. And what do you, as a writer, get from putting your work on paper? What are you learning about yourself when you do this too?
Well, Building Insanely Great Products, I published back in 1996, and I'm actually stealing a term from Steve Jobs, who used to talk about insanely great products. And these are products that provide tremendous customer satisfaction. It does what the customer wants to do faster or better, which is innovation. So it covers my experiences in terms of the 5 keys of product success, across the 75 products and services that I've worked on in my career with a number of different examples. And then the last 30 pages tells the story of the last year of the Apple III, because after I brought that hard disk drive to market, I was asked, because they noticed I knew how to manage, having managed a nationwide student organization, having managed a gubernatorial and a presidential campaign, that I knew how to manage. So they asked me to become the group product manager for the Apple III product line. And at the time, there was two profit centers at Apple, the Apple II and the Apple III. And then after Steve Jobs, in his fit of trying to get every product in the market from the company out of the marketplace that he wanted to go with his beloved Macintosh, even though he wasn't shipping, he convinced the executive committee to shut down the Apple III product line. And a few weeks later, John Scully, the president, asked me, what should we do? And I said, what do you mean, we, paleface? And he hadn't heard the joke. So I'd explained to him that there was this hero called the Lone Ranger, wore a mask, wore white clothes, rode a white horse named Trigger, and he had an Indian sidekick by the name of Tonto. And when I tell this story to people from India, I have to say American Indian sidekick named Tonto. And they get surrounded in the desert by 10,000 yelling, screaming Indians. And the Lone Ranger turns to Tonto, says, Tonto, here we are surrounded by 10,000 yelling, screaming Indians, and all they want to do is scalp us. What should we do? And Tonto said, what do you mean, we, paleface? Which was the slang for the white man at the time. So I explained to Scully and the CFO and the VP of manufacturing and the director of marketing that were in the room with me that I've been trying to get a promotion together for the Apple III, and I have to go through 8 levels of bureaucracy in the organization before it actually gets presented to the salesperson at a dealership on the floor that they can then use to help sell the Apple III to a prospective customer. So he said, what should we do about it? I says, give me the authority commensurate with the responsibility, which goes back to the brand manager at Procter & Gamble. The brand manager at PG&E had budget authority over market research, over advertising, and over PR, and over the production of sales collateral, sales training, and that type of thing, which in the HP version of the classical product manager, they don't have a budget. So they have to rely upon their negotiation and mediation skills to persuade everybody like a pack of animals to go off in the same direction rather than going off into different directions. So he agreed with that. So make me a proposal. I got 80 people in the company to help contribute information for the proposal, presented it on July 15th, 1983, a day that will live in infamy, at least in my mind, and presented a series of alternatives for the company to the executive committee. And the climax of the meeting was when Floyd Kwame, who was then VP of Sales and Marketing, says, Dave, if we pick the option to shut the product line down like Steve wants, or if we pick the option of let the market decide when they're going to stop buying the product, and a dealer calls you, what would you say? I said, well, if you decide, let the market decide. I'd tell the dealer, so long as people are buying the product, we're going to continue to support it and service it and market it and enhance it and develop it. But if the company has decided to shut the product line down, I said to Floyd, I'll give him your phone number. And the executive committee laughed really hard because we understood that shutting the product line down is not showing empathy for the customers.
Yeah.
It's not showing positive social contribution. It's not showing team spirit. It's not showing success. It's not showing, most importantly, good management. And that would have cost the company about 50,000 people that owned Apple IIIs and hard disks, which would be equivalent to a $30,000 computer today. It would have shown that the company was disloyal to their customers. And as a result of that, it would have driven all those people and their next computer purchase to a Microsoft Windows product.
I think that's fascinating, Dave. And I think what's interesting for me, and I'm hearing this, and what I love is that you've asked for permission to be able to share what you need to say, that to me, a lot of leaders can miss. They come in assuming I've got the voice, I've got the platform, I'm going to say this, but then you're getting that buy-in, and then there's a willingness to listen. And I'll say what's interesting about you is the fact that you were integral at Apple, HP, consulting these organizations. That alone gives people the ability to say, hey, he's credible. He knows what he's talking about. He's seen it, he's been there, he's done it, and he's able to not only tell you about what he's done in the past, he's able to show you what he's doing with organizations now, especially with the rise of generative AI. I want to ask from this standpoint, David, we talk about your book, we're talking about your trainings, but you also provide online courses and online trainings, not just saying, hey, bring me in, I'll come in and do this training for your company. You're saying, look, we could develop a learning track, a growth track for your company here in house. Talk about that aspect and what you're seeing from a course content creation to now a delivery to measuring the not only access of the content, not only completion of the content, but now growth from the content.
Yeah, I have all of my courses, which you can find links to on my website, spicecatalyst.com. So they're online on demand, and they're video recordings of each of the lectures along with quizzes to see that the student has accumulated the required knowledge to be competent in that particular area. So I have a half a dozen of those courses, including building and selling great products, product market strategy, personas, product positioning, fundamentals of marketing, social media marketing, and so forth. And you can find access to them through my website.
I also love that you have a boot camp as well. You're not just saying, here, here's something we could drip you, or here's something you could put in your plan for a monthly or weekly cadence. Hey, we could do a boot camp for you. We could literally get you all in, and we could go through this. And I know it might seem like a crash course aspect, but it's one of those things of, if we're prepared for it and you're ready for it, let's give it to you right away. Dave, are there any other pearls of wisdom or advice you would like to give to organizations or even to business owners that are listening to our program that say, hey, I am interested in learning how to balance innovation, be practical, and understand how to get the best out of what I'm trying to provide to my customers? And maybe it could be something as simple as learning how to listen to the voice of the customer more, or it could be something as simple as, hey, let's just fine tune or just kind of give a little sharpening edge to the leaders that you have within your organization so they know how to work collectively as a team. But any other advice you want to leave for our listening audience today?
Well, it's the focus on what it is that the customer wants to do. And that's a more granular level of what a Harvard professor wrote some books about called outcome-based innovation, or what Tony Ulrich at the Stratagem writes about called jobs to be done. For example, I had a job when I was in Singapore after speaking at a product management conference, and I had to go to Bangalore, India, to train Cisco and product management and give speeches at Dell, at Samsung, at Philips, and so forth. And so the job to be done was I had to get from my hotel in Singapore to my hotel in Bangalore. Okay, well, I had to decide which mode of transportation I was going to use to get to the airport, what time to leave, take into consideration how much it's going to cost. When I get to the airport, find the ticket counter, which I finally did, and they said, you can't check in to go to India until you can prove you're going to leave India. And I said, well, my speeches have not been finalized yet, so I'm not sure exactly when I'm going to leave. They said, it doesn't matter. You have to prove you're going to leave so before you can come. Well, everybody knew that. The airline knew that ahead of time, but nobody told me. So then I had to go through the process of trying to buy a ticket out of the place or out of India so they could go to India. And the story goes on and on and on. So this failure of focusing on what it is that the customer wants to do is what is fundamental in the failure of products and services worldwide. And the focus on that and monitoring it, this is most important, monitoring it as how it changes over time. For example, you have to find 15 unmet needs before you're going to have a successful product or service. I was given credit for inventing advertising on cell phones in 2003. And I'd gone out and asked people, would you like to run ads on cell phones? They would have said no. Well, today it's well over a $15 billion a year business. So I entered the marketplace with my little company called Maui Games, to build cell phone games that had embedded advertising about 4 years too early before the iPhone came out. And as a result, I spent all of the capital I had and had to shut down the business.
Mm.
So the key thing that people have to do, companies have to do, is find those 15 unmet needs, then get into the marketplace and set up what we call listening posts to follow how those needs are changing, those unmet needs are changing over time. And when it gets to the point where there's tons of competition, especially in the area of price, then you convert that product to what the Boston Consulting Group calls a cash cow and reap profits off of it without any more investments, and then eventually exit the marketplace with demonstrating and showing loyalty to your customers.
David, this has been an incredibly fascinating conversation, and we'll have to bring you back on because I think what you said here, and I'm telling you, this has been amazing. 15 unmet needs have to be identified first. We get this idea, let's just throw it on the marketplace. You said, look, Dave, I had the idea. I was just too early in it. And I think that's what's interesting. And I appreciate you even saying, hey, learn from what I didn't do right. But here's what companies are doing every day. They're getting their thought, their idea, and they're throwing it out there without first making sure that there's not only a appetite for it, but there's an understanding that your product or service you're going to deliver is going to meet exactly what they're looking for. The other thing you talked about, David, and I appreciate you talking about being in India, Singapore. You talk about traveling overseas. We're not just talking about hey, if it's good in the US, it's going to be good everywhere else. No, we've seen historically how companies, even the largest brands, have failed because they failed to understand the cultural impact, whether it's by design, whether it's wording, whether it's colors. There's so much that needs to be factored into. So, Dave, come back on the show. Let's dive into those two aspects because I think people need to hear that. But I want to thank you for coming on. If you're listening today, follow David on LinkedIn, visit spicecatalyst.com. I guarantee you, if you go there and you start interacting with his team, you're going to find that they're going to bring some spice to your product development and management, and you're going to see greater outcomes and achievements. David, thank you for joining our program today.